Hello, everyone. Welcome to Breakout Session A2, Stories of Reinvention, Evolving as Chefs and Entrepreneurs in a Time of Constant Change. Looks like we've got everybody coming into the session right now. Hope you enjoyed your break. But let's get started. We've got as our moderator for this session, Chandra Ram, who is a CIA grad and editor of Plate, an award-winning food magazine. She's also the author of The Complete Indian Instant Pot Cookbook and is one half of the fantastic chef duo who will be leading us through the Global Flatbreads Cook-Along on Friday. But first, I'm going to hand things over to her to get this started. So let's bring Chandra up.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you all so much for joining us. One thing we have all seen in the last 6-7 months is the fact that the pandemic has thrown our industry for a loop. And I've heard chef after chef tell us, and we've certainly reported on it in the magazine, that having to change and to pivot, that sort of word that's become dreaded now, that's become more important than ever, especially now as we see a second, or some are even calling it a third wave of COVID cases rising in the US and around the world, and restaurants are being shut down, and we need to figure out, how to keep our industry going, and also just kind of talk about when is the point when you want to say, I want to do something new. So we've got 3 amazing culinary experts here to talk about their moment when they decided to change their careers and go into something new. So we'll talk about that today. Our 3 panelists today include Hawa Hassan, who is the founder and CEO of Bas Foods, and she's the author of the very recently fantastic, just released book, In Bibi's Kitchen, The Recipes and Stories of Grandmothers from the 8 African Countries that Touch the Indian Ocean. Joining us from Milan is Alice Delcor. She is the chef owner of Ristorante Erba Brusca, an environmentally focused restaurant and farm in Milan. And from North Carolina, Gabrielle Eitienne. She's an artist and cultural preservationist who uses diasporic and local foodways as a vehicle to reimagine wealth, marginalized food systems, and inheritance. And she is the co-founder of the North Carolina Black Farmer CSA Tall Grass Food Box, a platform to support and encourage the sustainability of Black farmers by increasing their visibility and securing space for them in the local marketplace. This is a powerhouse panel. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to get started talking about the moment. And we've had a lot of conversations and emails over the last few weeks about that point when you are living your life and your life is not terrible and it's kind of working, but you see possibility and you see something else ahead of you. And Gabrielle, I wonder if you could kick off the conversation talking about what that moment was for you, because you were working in Black Foodways, working with Chef J.J. Johnson, doing research. Can you tell us a bit about what you were doing and what prompted you to move to North Carolina, change everything?
Yeah, sure. So it was a really interesting time in my life. This was 2018 that I was working with Chef J.J. Johnson. I was also doing some other kind of storytelling driven work. And all of those things had me coming home more frequently. And every time I would come home, I would get in the garden with my grandfather, with his brother, my grand uncle, Andrew. And I would leave the South and come back to New York with my suitcase full of collards and rutabagas and all the things and preserves and chow chow. And I just was trying to grasp this connected feeling that I felt when I was home, this kind of groundedness that I felt when I was in the garden with those things and those items. And so The kitchen has always been my space to like conjure that feeling of home. But the work that I was doing was reminding me that like I had my own very personal food culture that was happening right in Apex, North Carolina, right in the house that I grew up in. But I wasn't activating that the way that I knew I could be. I was, basically doing research for others and, working in a space that was really cool. And, I was learning so much about other foodways and different people, but I wasn't actually like utilizing what was mine, what was my own birthright, my own inheritance. And so it's really crazy because I had just gotten a really cool job with a catering company at the time as their culinary director, Harvest and Revel. They were out of Brooklyn. It was just like this very sexy dream job. And I had to say no and like leave New York. And I couldn't really explain that to people, right? Because number one, like from the outside looking in, it's like, wait, are you on Sex and the City? Are you? So it was one of those things. Like I told my close circle. I remember going to my friend Nicole Taylor. Shout out Nicole Taylor of South Cookbook.
Amazing person.
Yes. And a few other folks, and just kind of like letting them know, like, I'm doing this thing because I have this feeling and I can't really explain it, but my grandfather's in his 80s and I know it's important that I like preserve this information that he's giving me every time I go home. And so I it's crazy. I left the job in November and I moved home in December and arrived January 1st, 2018. At my home, I packed a minivan full of my stuff and drove from Brooklyn to North Carolina and was like, hey, y'all, I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't have anything necessarily. I was living off of my savings, but I was in the garden. As soon as the spring hit, I was in the garden every single day. So
it's amazing, isn't it? Because you have this moment and you make the decision, and then you have to kind of market it a little bit. Like you have to figure out how to explain it to people so they're okay with the fact that you just changed your life. And I can imagine, like you're telling so beautifully, you've got this amazing culinary opportunity in New York City where everyone thinks everything happens, and you turn your back on it, but it winds up being for good. And Alice, I want to pivot over to you because you have lived all over the US and Europe. And I feel like that is something that really resonated with me when I was reading about your story, is that you were kind of like, okay, so I've grown up in a couple of countries and I'm going to be open to wherever my work, my life takes me. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Alice, I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear?
I can't.
Okay, tell you what. While Alice is sorting out the audio, Hawa, we're going to go to you. And kind of the same thing. Like you turned your back on a career that people are like, oh my gosh, I would die to do that. But you're like, Can you talk about your moment for us?
Yeah, so like Gabby was just saying that I'd had a longing for home, a space in which I belonged in. I was sick and tired of narratives that were created for me and living those out on behalf of other people, aka sometimes working for someone to bring their story to life. And every time I went home, I had this grounding feeling, like literally. I had this grounding feeling, which to me just kept saying, I want to be here more than I want to be anywhere else. And ultimately, I ended up converting on that by making my company Best, but I know we'll get into that later. Alice is back if you want to pivot back, pivot.
No, we can't hear you, Alice.
Oh, no.
Okay, so that's fine. So we'll catch up. We'll catch up with Alice in a second. So, Hawa, when you're saying like every time you went home, that was the place that really resonated. Which home was that for you?
It was Norway. It was Oslo, where my mother and my 9 siblings were living at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 7. 2 were at boarding school in Kenya, where we grew up. But every time I went back to Oslo, every time I was with my mother in her business or at home in the kitchen, or some nights in her bed because she wanted to cuddle. As a fully grown adult, my mother was like, let's sleep together.
Yeah.
I just kept thinking that this life I had built in New York City was not one that served me, and ultimately was not going to serve the kind of woman I wanted to become. And so in 2014, I ended up quitting modeling, like Gabby, packed up my bags in Fort Greene, put my things in storage, had a friend from Botswana take over my lease in this apartment that I just never wanted to give up because the rent was great.
Oh.
And
I mean, you turned your back on cheap real estate in New York City, so I think we should like respect.
Can we
that.
just hand of applause?
I moved back to Seattle, where I grew up with my childhood best friend, who's Ethiopian, born in Sudan, like us, was running from conflict. And her and her husband were living in a 2-bedroom apartment because he was a grad student, and they had 2 children. So I moved in with the children. They took 1 bunk, I took the top bunk. Or I took the bottom bunk, they took the top bunk. So, you know, I think people think that this whole thing is so sexy and like, it's this, it's that. It's like, it's messy.
I mean, it is. I mean, this whole process of like packing up everything, moving, what you and Gabrielle are describing to me sounds like it should be remade into a Thelma and Louise minus the tragic ending situation. Maybe Elizabeth, but just sort of like, I love this idea of picturing the 2 of you like packing up your places and saying like, no, I'm going to just get in my car, and it's New Year's. I love the symbolism of it, Gabrielle, New Year's. And I'm just going to like, I'm going to drive and I'm going to see what I can create there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it absolutely felt like one of those moments. I remember driving and like the birds were like coming to points over me while I was on the highway. And it just felt so symbolic and so like, okay, yeah, this is right. This is where I need to be right now on this highway in this minivan full of my stuff.
So Alice, we've been talking about like these moments when Gabrielle and Hawa like moved and sort of said like, I've been listening. I'm going to move it forward. So I'm sorry. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh God, I don't know what I didn't do anything. I'm so sorry. Okay. Great.
No, you're fine. You're fine. So talk to us about, because you have moved a lot.
Yeah, so right, what I was saying is that I feel like I've had the fortune to live in many different places. Nothing that exotic, but I think what's great and difficult at the same time is when you live in lots of different places, as I was saying, is that you kind of feel like you belong anywhere but nowhere at the same time, you know? And you have this, I think, a privileged position of being able to look into different kinds of cultures, especially in my field in food, that allow you to really draw from the traditions, you know, that of the country that you are in, or that is hosting you, or that you feel like is yours, but you're not tied down by those traditions. And that's always been really important to me, at least, especially in Italy, for example, and in my field. I don't try and make, for example, exactly the same kind of lasagna that somebody's grandma has been making for hundreds and hundreds of years, because I'm never going to be able to compete. I'm never going to be able to make it that way, because it's a tradition that's been passed down from generation to generation. But I am going to maybe interpret that or be inspired by it and then reinvent it using my background and my baggage, you know, and create something new. And I've always felt really privileged to be able to have those kinds of opportunities to explore the different traditions and use them, but without trying to imitate.
I think you're bringing up such an incredible point, because we're all talking, especially when we talk about food, when we talk about any culture, there's that dreaded, like, is it authentic, which, blah, hate it.
Yeah.
But you have to, when you make a move like the three of you have made, you have to have a self-assurance that my version of food in Milan may not be like the guy down the road who has, whose family has been operating out of that space for generations, or, it may not be like what an American consumer is looking for, or, it may not jive with a farming tradition that people in North Carolina are used to, but you have to believe in what you're doing and your point of view to make that happen.
Yeah, I feel like to that point, I almost feel like I have dual citizenship of sorts, because I am from this place. I'm back in the neighborhood that I grew up in, that my mom grew up in, that my family has been within like a 5-mile radius of for generations, working the land. And so I have a special relationship to this community and to the people who I like spend time with, who are like willing to share these recipes with me so that I can archive them. And so that I can like celebrate them in my own way and share them with other people. And I think initially I was nervous to stray away from the way things had always been done. And so I think I'm really just in the last year coming into this comfort around my ability to do my own thing, to trust my instinct and my experiences, because I lived in other places and I've, experienced other things, to take these recipes, which I think archiving them as they've been done for generations is so important, because it's so much more than just a recipe. A friend of mine, Justin Robinson, who is a botanist who lives here in North Carolina, we go down rabbit holes all day around like how this stuff is a sacred text. Like, this is how our people communicated things and kept these secrets and kept this knowledge and information. It was through the food, it was through the recipes, it was through the garden. And so there's a respect that you have to have for those things. And we are allowed to create our own version, inspired by these stories and placed in the now context for later generations to go back when I'm their ancestor to reference, and then be inspired to do their own thing. So I think it's kind of, feel like I danced that line for a while, like, I don't know if I can change this recipe. And now I'm like, oh, but now I'm using magnolia bay leaves from the magnolia tree versus, the bay laurel that my grandmother used,
Well, Howard, you must have run into this quite a bit to sort of like dare say this is a sauce. And this is, every time, in any culture, you're like, as soon as you present something, there's always going to be someone rolling in being like, what are you talking about? Like in the chat here, one of the attendees, Mary Rollins, is like, she's like, this is something I run into making potato salad for a catered event, because people come in and they're like, well, why is there mayonnaise on this? Why isn't there mayonnaise on this? Like, so how did you manage that with sauces? Because you can't, when I write something and it goes online, I can go through and edit it if I need to afterwards, but that sauce is in a jar, my friend. It's out.
Well, I wrote this on Instagram, I think in February, when I was at the test kitchen at VA. And I said, I am making food from my origins that are passed down to me through my family. And so if you, as a Somali person with your gangster thumb and on YouTube are like, we don't make sugo squat that way. We don't make our pasta sauce like that. We don't make our pancakes the way that she's making them. I'm not you. I am talking about me and my origins. I am drawing from the women in my family, from my mother, from my ayeyo, which is our grandmother. Those are the people whose recipes I'm bringing to life, and then putting a twist on it for myself and the audience I'm trying to reach. Because ultimately, I'm doing one thing, which is change the rhetoric on what it means to be Somali and to demystify that African food is difficult to make. Anything else is a distraction. So if you're, if my best isn't too spicy, it's not for you. We've done the market research. Somalis don't shop at Whole Foods for the most part, My mom shops at the Pakistani store in Norway. Full stop. In Oslo, she goes to the same Pakistani grocery store almost every single day. She's not going to, where the Norwegians shop. Same here with my uncles and my aunt. They live in Minnesota. They don't go to Whole Foods. And so when I explain it that way to Somalis, they're like, they always go, mashallah, like, God bless you, like, you're, or alhamdulillah, like, okay. For them, there's an element of me being American, which I don't care what it is. These stories were not being told. These recipes were not being preserved. I came and I put myself in a position to have these conversations about myself and my family. And I'm doing it from a narrative that CNN wasn't doing it from. That's it.
That's it. And you're continuing the narrative with your book and the project of finding conveniently right there.
Wow.
Nice.
Available online and at your independent bookstore. So what I'm seeing here is for you, it's about telling this story. And so I'm curious for all of you, how much do you think about how you're communicating your story versus the work that you're doing? Because it's kind of two jobs. I mean, Alice, you get to run a restaurant, the very quick side hustle of parenting two 13-year-olds. And
they're sick. I'm not the teenagers yet.
Okay. I'm thinking somebody else has got their geos. Apologies.
Heart attack.
You're 6-year-olds. Okay, so they seem easy. And then, so you're running a restaurant morning to night, you're doing this, and you're also having to communicate your vision. And I wonder if starting the farm was a way for you to kind of provide a visual of like, hey, look, this is how much I care about the ingredients. This is how much I care about the food. There's a farm right here.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that actually, starting the farm actually came out of a place that was really different from that. It was something much more personal. It was, I run the restaurant with my partner, Danilo, and he had been doing lots of courses on permaculture and market gardening. And we had just been doing we've always done a lot of work with suppliers. I mean, the suppliers have always been the most important thing from the get-go. But the more that we're more plant-based, we're not a vegetarian restaurant, but the more that we were interested in producing our own. And it was just a way for us all to keep, to stay excited, I think, about our project. I mean, I think that anyone who's ever worked in a restaurant knows it can have high rate of burnout. And so even people who have their own restaurants and love them, they can get burned out. I mean, that's why people change the furniture or hire new staff or change the menu. And so I think that we were in kind of a constant state of flux, and we were different people from who we were almost 10 years ago when we opened the restaurant. And so we had gotten to a point where we finally decided that we wanted to really expand. Before, we had a very small vegetable garden behind the restaurant. And so a couple of years ago, we rented about 1.5 acres next to the restaurant, and prepared the land and made a well and got all of the paperwork done. And we now have a very well-functioning market garden and vegetable plot. And For us, it was much more personal, just kind of give it a lot more meaning to what we were doing. I think that it helps me create the food that I'm making, but also kind of when I work in the garden and I come into the kitchen, it all just makes everything come full circle. I think that actually I have a really hard time communicating our vision. One of the reasons I love to work in the kitchen is because I don't have to write or be behind a computer or talk about it. I just have to cook my food. And that's something I've always really loved. It's very tangible. You know, you make something, somebody eats it, and you know right away if you've done a good job or not. You know, there's like no editing. Once in their mouth, it's done. But I realized that the world has really changed, even from 10 years ago. And the way that you communicate is incredibly important, and the platforms you use and who follows you. And that for me has been a really big challenge in the last few years. I mean, it's amazing to me how many people who live even in Milan or come to our restaurant don't even know that we have, you know, the farm at all. And I realize that that's probably where I've failed communicating. And so it's kind of like a learning curve for me. I think there's part of me, and maybe I'm probably older than someone like Gabrielle, you're so eloquent and communicative. I'm so envious. But that I feel like there's part of me that sometimes feels like you sell out or something. Like I'm afraid I'll say something that won't be true if I say it and then I don't live up to it or something. And so I've always been really shy on some of those things. I'm trying to learn how to use Instagram better and all of those. But yeah, it's important to communicate your vision, because if not, you can't know who else shares it.
Right. Well,
that's powerful.
Sorry?
Yeah.
That's powerful.
It is. It is. And I feel like, Gabrielle, like you've co-founded this Black Farmer CSA to help, you know, as part of your work to communicate your mission. Can you talk a bit about that, about how you got it started?
Sure. So this was not what, just like I'm sure all of you, this is not what 2020 was supposed to look like necessarily. But when I started to kind of hear some of what was going on with the farmers here locally and abroad, you know, people like getting rid of euthanizing their hogs, dumping and wasting food. It really, like, I don't know, that along with some other things created an urgency within me to make sure that food went to the community. And, you know, for our farmers here, which that's been the last 2 years of my life, has been building community with other Black farmers and learning from them, spending time and trying to, you know, not only archive like some of the things that they're passing down, but also like there's this beautiful exchange that happens when you just spend time with people. And so starting this really was just about reaching out to those farmers. My partner and I, Derek, you know, wanted to see if there was actually a need, because sometimes things in the media can look one way and you can think you're doing a thing to help people when really they're just like, okay, sit down, you know. But when we reached out to some of the farmers that we had been in community with, there was a problem, you know, like they didn't have a place to put this produce. They grew this food, you know, they raise these animals, they need to be slaughtered, so we just kind of jumped into action. We reached out to a friend of ours, Gerald Harris, who's the third part of Tallgrass. And, you know, I had a website because some of my preservation work, I was calling my first like short experimental documentary Tallgrass. And so that already had like a little website that I was doing nothing with, by the way. Like I had a movie night for my community, and we showed the film in my grandfather's shop, which is right behind our house, on what I call the homestead. And so like that was about all that was going on, was like the highlights from that movie night. So we just slapped up an order form for people to place orders. We took like 30 orders for the first round, and we were like, okay, stop it. We can't do more than 30 boxes. You know, because we were still working. I mean, people were still working full-time jobs. Things looked different, but we were just, we weren't sure what the turnout was going to be exactly. And so we capped it at 30. And our farmers, like, were just so incredible. So I just remember Mr. Stanley Hughes from Pine Knot Farms being like, him and his wife, being like, y'all can use our barn as your processing spot. You know, like, we got boxes, you know, like they were helping us because we like went to the U-Haul to get boxes. You know, we were just making it happen. We didn't know what we were doing. We were just taking names, taking orders, and making it happen. And what we did know from the beginning was we're going to pay our farmers retail for their produce. We're not going to pay them wholesale, because we want this space to be a place where they can actually like have some normalcy on some level. You know, like, this is kind of like a farmer's market on some level. So we stood by that, and that's been really awesome. When we've seen, like, you know, just the response from our farmers has been enough to keep this going, but also like the community that we serve here in Durham and Raleigh. Everybody's just been so hype about it. The CSA box pickups have become like little parties, you know, like people were just so happy to connect and see one another.
See other human beings. That's like the new party.
It was a whole thing. We made sure every time we would have music playing. You know, everybody had to social distance, but, you know, get your box and like air hug from across the way. And so, you know, this really came out of the pandemic, this CSA, but it was 2, if not more, years in the making to build these relationships for people to trust us and our vision to bring this to life.
Well, we've got a question from the audience, and I also want to say, if anyone, I know CIA has gotten some requests from people who want to join on screen, so we'll open that up. But this is from Eric Montel, who is who's a really great person and the executive director of dining at Stanford, and he wants to know how large institutions like his can support Black farmers and how can they connect with them. I'm going to open it up to how can. Not to put all of it on Eric, he's going to send me a message, be like, what did you just sign me up for? But how can people support the work each of you is doing?
Should I go? Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
boots on the ground. I wore this shirt today, Pay Black Farmers, for a reason. Okay, I feel like this has definitely been a really powerful year where we're reclaiming agriculture in a new way. And there's a special need for us to like know how to grow our own food and be connected to people who grow food locally and support those people. So I appreciate that question. And I think, you know, one of the ways that I can't speak for all Black farmers everywhere, of course. But I think what we've seen here is when we have people who are willing to partner to do things for the long haul versus like kind of, you know, not to reference this moment, but there was a moment where everybody was like, buy Black. And that moment came and everybody's businesses like surged for about 2 months. And then people were like, all right, I bought Black. You know, like
you're like, check, I had the Black box on Instagram, and then I bought like a candle, and no, I'm an
And like, I think, you know, as a Black entrepreneur / farmer / cultural preservationist, like I appreciated that boost. And I think this moment is really called for partners and people who are like willing to like, you know, not just necessarily in this moment, but how can we sustain something long term, and how can you all be a part of these conversations that we're having about how we can bring some of the resources our farmers need, like, you know, where they're getting their seeds, where they're getting their plants. That's been one of the conversations we've been having with them, and they're driving all the way to Virginia sometimes to get these collard transplants. And we want to make sure that, like we've been saving, a little bit of what we've made. We've been saving that to try and put it back into our community, for our farmers and for our community. So figuring out like how we can own that facility that is growing those collards and have it be local and have it be Black owned. Those are the types of conversations that we're having. And, I don't have that proposal ready and up, but I think reaching out and staying in touch and just setting that intention and letting us know like, hey, when you do have the ideas or you have the outline for what it is that's next, we're here and we want to hear what you're talking about. That feels important, and that feels like a way to support us, and like, so we know we're keeping an inventory of who those partners and who those allies are and conspirators are, for when it is time to make a big move, because a lot is going on right now. And I know, I can't speak for everybody, but there's a lot of, I can feel it in my community and the people and my friends and people I'm talking to, that we don't know what's going to happen over the next few weeks and months. And beyond the pandemic, the election and all the other things, there's a lot of anxiety. And we want to make sure that, we're setting ourselves up for what it looks like to have a sustained operation for the long haul and not just in this moment, because we don't know what tomorrow might look like. So I appreciate that question. I would love to keep in touch.
Okay. So I think to stay in touch with you, I know, as an editor, I use the website Equity at the Table as a resource to find Black, Black and people of color, photographers, writers, artists, things like that. So I think, trying to, and just seeking out and asking the question. We do need to wrap up in just a sec, but Alice, Hawa, do you have any thoughts on how people can support you and your business, your endeavors?
I'll just to Eric's question about how institutions can better support people of color and Black people. I would say that you offer people equity. You offer them things that are tangible. So, you have at Stanford, you have the capacity to create hybrid projects. You could do that with Gabby. At Stanford, which is a large institute, you have the capacity to bring people on to even advise on some of the things that are happening on campus in terms of food. You do that with someone like Alice. And so I think it'll take some improvising, but it's things that can easily be done, because the answer is not buying a condiment from my website, because now that I've been overwhelmed, people are upset that it's a 30-day backlog, and so, and in order for the 30-day backlog not to happen, institutions like Stanford could help people like myself have enough, or even your network, Eric, enough funding so that I'm in better position to support the growth of my business. So I would say introducing your network, making yourself available, and then, putting yourself in position to be of service to people.
Okay.
Yeah, nicely said.
This is such an amazing conversation. I'm sorry to pop up to have to say that we are at time, but I know that we've still got last words coming from everybody. So I'm going to bring it back to Chandra in just a little bit for that. But before we get to that, I just wanted to let everyone know about the awesome activities we've got planned for this upcoming break. You'll be able to network with other attendees. Today's topic is what new global dishes you cooked at home during the pandemic. You're going to be able to see some great culinary demos and trends presentations in our sponsor booths in the expo, and additional special presentations, and meet the meet the author opportunities, including with our very own Chandra and Hawa in the session tab. And participating in these activities, as well as the daily scavenger hunt, will get you running for some great prizes. Don't forget, our next general session kicks off tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, when we're headed to France, Spain, London, and Brazil to start the day. All right, Chandra, I'm going to give it back to you to lead our panelists through the final question.
Okay, the final question. One quick sentence. What is your mantra for the future? Alice, I'm going to put you on the spot first. Please tell me it includes the rest of us visiting you in Milan.
Oh, please come to Milan. We need more people to visit us. I really think that it's about diversifying and expanding. So I believe that we should all be thinking about diversifying ourselves and expanding who we are and our skills and your comfort zones, which I think everyone's had to really push in 2020. So that's kind of been my mantra. And then obviously do what you love. And if you don't love it anymore, you need to boil it down, chop it up, find it again, do something new, because change is here. So it's like.
Okay, Gabrielle?
Oh, that was so good. I feel like less of a mantra and more of like a word. Feels like Sankofa. For me, that has been kind of one of my grounding words that I use, which it just means to reach back, to go back and get it, kind of looking back for inspiration and grounding yourself in, what's already there. You don't necessarily need to go out and recreate something. The CSA very much feels like the work my grandmother was doing in our community when her and other Black women were checking on other families to be like, y'all need groceries? What do y'all need? This is the same way we've always shown up. So I think had I not accessed that this is not new, I may have been like, well, what do I do to help? But just go back to look for those answers.
Okay. Hawa, bring us home.
Mine is quick and it's two parts. So it's this shall too pass, which it always does. Nothing's permanent outside of obviously death. And then my second thing is that to stay flexible. I'm attached to no outcome.
I'm attached to no outcome.
Ooh.
If all of this is over, I'm packing up.
Hey.
I'm gonna call you Minister Hawa from now on.
I mean, okay.
She's the one who wrote it, Gabrielle.
She did.
That was pretty powerful. I want it on a t-shirt. And by the way, Gabrielle, we did get a question to please restock your t-shirt so that
yes, I want one
more.
Too.
I want one too.
Oh, thank you. Very soon. Pre-order right now to my Cash App.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna let you send your Venmo out on the chat. If you
no, we're good. But subscribe to our website. We'll be sending out a newsletter when we re-up very soon.
Okay, subscribe to everyone's website. Follow them on social media. They will continue to communicate what they're up to, but I think also very importantly, this advice and this vision. So thank you all so much. This has been rather uplifting.
Yes.
All right. And thank you, CIA, for having us and putting us together. It's been really fun.
Yes, amazing.
Bye.
Bye.